Hey everybody, welcome to the week 4 overview video. Let me get right to it, sharing our course module. This is the week 4 module and we're exploring the connection between literacy practices and identity. So let me go over the assignments for the week, what you need to be expecting for this week, and we'll go into the readings. So this week we have some readings dealing primarily with African-American writing and literacy and that kind of thing. So the readings are from Young and Mellix in chapter 5. If I share here, Young, we have Vershawn Ashanti Young. Should writers use they own English? So this will be a little bit different for you. And I'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, but it's just a little bit different reading for you because Young in this article uses a mix of dialects in his writing. And with Mellix, which is the second reading, as soon as that comes up, Barbara Mellix, she has a completely different approach. Her piece was printed in a literary journal, so she takes a different approach and writes primarily in what we call standard English, but a very interesting perspective from both of these writers. Now let me go back to the week 4 overview here. Under Young's article here, you'll see that I have a couple of recommended links. One is on African-American Vernacular English. This is just a Wikipedia article that tells you a little bit more about it. I will talk about this in a moment. And then the other one is the article, What Should Colleges Teach? Part 3 by Stanley Fish. And this is actually the article that Young refers to or is responding to in the piece that's in our textbook. I don't have any additional links from Barbara Mellix, but I do actually have a list of notes from this week's reading that I'm going to post up. I haven't posted here yet, but I also have a PDF of the literacy narrative assignment. So looking at the to-do list, you're of course watching this overview video and any related lectures. Complete the reading. Of course, you should be taking notes, making annotations on your readings, since some of the stuff will actually be very helpful for you as you get to writing your papers. We have discussion board, which is a code meshing switching initial response due the 3rd, and then we have peer response for that discussion board due on the 6th. Lastly, we wrap things up with the literacy narrative rough draft, and that is due Sunday the 6th. So let's move through here. So this is the discussion board assignment. I'm having you watch this video, which is a really interesting video relating to the whole topic of code meshing and code switching that we are getting exposed to in both Young and Mellix's essays. So watch this video. It's probably about, I don't know, 5 minutes long. I can't remember, but this is a spoken word poem. So it's a poem that's meant to be performed. It wouldn't be something that you would sit down and read, but something that is meant to be performed and is meant to be provocative. So there is a transcript. If you actually want to read her written words, there is a transcript that's on the TED page. And if you just click the link, you should see a link for transcript below, or sometimes they have a transcript button that's over on the side of the video. And then you'll be able to access the transcript. So then after you watch the video, I want you to respond to these questions. Let me just tell you, I don't know what the heck is going on down here. This is what it looks like in my I was going to say my viewer, in my browser. It's the formatting for some reason is messed up. I spent a ton of time yesterday trying to fix it, and it still looks this way, and I don't know why. Hopefully it looks different in your computers. But if it doesn't, you just will have to navigate through my print and you know, click on reply and all of that stuff. So anyway, to do your discussion post, you will click on reply, you'll reply to these questions. If you want to copy those questions into a document and type up your response and then post it in the discussion board, that's fine as well. Sometimes it's better to do that because, you know, with computers and things, we can't auto save in the discussion board, and it's really frustrating as a student. And I know I've had experience with this as well. It's really frustrating to type out this long, wonderful reply, and then it's lost because you either misclicked a button or you know, something happened with Canvas. So sometimes it's a good idea to actually type out your answers and then either copy and paste them into the board or attach the document. Either way, you can attach a document simply by clicking on the attach button down here. Anyway, answer the questions. So you'll need to post your own response before you can read others' posts. Respond to these 3 question prompts above. I'm not going to say 3 questions because each prompt up here has multiple questions. So the first one is relating to the Young article. The second one is relating to Mellix's article. And then just asking you to respond if you've had any experience switching languages, changing with the variations, ways that you talk to people. You know, if you talk differently to your teachers than you talk to your friends, talk differently to family, that kind of thing. How do you change the way you talk? Why do you talk a certain way to certain people and a different way with other people? So after you respond to those prompts, be sure to write in a way that will be understood by others, but use your own voice. You don't have to be completely formal. You can if that's your thing. But you can use your own voice, and then respond to 2 peers in a meaningful and engaging way. Avoid simple I agree, disagree statements. So this assignment, as I said, the initial response is due Thursday, February 3rd, and then responses to the peers, for some reason we can't see the due date there, is due Sunday, February 6th. It's worth 10 points, and in order to see the rubric, if you come up here and you click on this, we call this the 3-dot snowman, and you click on show rubric, it will show you the rubric. You get 6 points for your own response and 4 points for responding to your classmates, you know, up to 4 points. So that's the rubric there, and you can take a look at it in detail on your own time. So that's the discussion board. Next thing we have is the literacy narrative rough draft. I've recorded a separate video just to walk you through the literacy narrative, so I don't spend a ton of time on explaining the assignment here. So I expect you to watch this. This is about 6 to 7 minutes long. Just walks you through the assignment. Key things that you need to know for this assignment: it will be about 5 to 6 double-spaced 12-point font pages. That's roughly 1,200 to 1,500 words. If you use a citation style or if you use a formatting style that isn't MLA, one that includes a cover page, of course, those 5 to 6 pages, excuse me, those 5 to 6 pages don't include your cover pages, and it does not include your works cited or bibliography pages. Keep in mind, if you do quote from any of the articles that you've read or any part of our textbook that you've read so far, or any of the outside links, or even the video that you watch in this week's discussion board, if you quote from any of those or make reference to any of those, you will of course need to use proper citation and make sure that you have works cited or bibliography or references page. And that is due Sunday, February 6th at the end of the day. A heads up, and there will be more information on this. There will also be peer review for this rough draft, and that is due on Thursday, February 10th. Again, point that out in my little video there, but it's good to give you a heads up, and there'll be more information in week 5. So that is the literacy narrative rough draft. And I think that's it. Oh, I have, there's a PDF of the assignment itself if you want to download it and keep it in your files. So that is that for the module. Now, let me start talking a little bit about the 2 readings that were assigned for this week. So the first one is Should Writers Use Their Own English by Vershawn Ashanti Young. Again, this originally appeared in the Journal of Cultural Studies in 2010. So we're, you know, our textbook was published in 2020. It's now 2022. So we're 12 years ahead of what Young was pointing out in 2010. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that Young is responding to a series of articles, or a series of blog posts actually, that Stanley Fish wrote in the Opinionator, which is part of the New York Times. And the title of those is a 3-part series, What Should Colleges Teach? So we're looking at part 3 here. And if you want to explore that link and read it, it's just a couple of pages long. It's not very long, just to see where Fish is coming from. So this article is just Young's response to some of the things that Fish brought up in his 2009 blog post. So one thing that I want you to keep in mind here is this idea of code meshing. Young talks about code meshing, and he states on page 331, it blends dialects, international languages, local idioms, chat room lingo, and the rhetorical styles of various ethnic and cultural groups in both formal and informal speech acts. So he uses this term to replace the concept of code switching, which is a term used to mean that individuals should change from using one dialect at home to a more formal one in school and work. There's also a concept that I want you to think about that Young brings up on page 328, and this is the idea of prescribe versus describe. So this is a scholarly conversation that examines whether quote unquote standard English should be the prescribed form of correct language, or should we instead examine and describe how language is actually used? So this is something that Young talks about starting at the bottom of page 328 in our textbook. I also want to introduce you to this idea of what they have termed, both Young and Mellix term, Black vernacular. It goes by a bunch of different names. It's also known as African-American Vernacular English, AAVE, and in English and rhetoric and composition circles, we often see a lot of people referring to AAVE as an acceptable form of use of language and an acceptable form of dialect. Black English vernacular is another term, African-American English. There is also the original term from the 1970s called Ebonics. Ebonics is actually a combination of ebony, which is black, and phonics, which is the sound or the study of sound. And this comes from Robert L. Williams's book, Ebonics, The True Language of Black Folks, that was published in 1975. So last point here, or last quote from Young, is from page 330. And this is just something that I want to, it's kind of giving us a preview into the last unit that we'll be working on in this course. And he states here, grad students also be trying too hard to sound smart, to write like the folk they be reading instead of using their own voices. And this relates to something that we'll be exploring later in the course, the way in which students are, I like to say, inducted into what's called the academic discourse community, that we learn different ways of expressing ourselves and use a different type of language that what we would normally use. So that's just something for you to tuck into the back of your minds. So let me summarize with some take-home points here from Young's piece. There's no such thing as a single unified standard English. Second point is conceptions of proper language are tied to the situation in which language is being used and the reader's assumptions about the individual using it. Expanding conceptions of what is appropriate is one way of reducing the racial prejudice informing some individuals' responses to particular dialects or vernaculars. And lastly, code meshing allows individuals to become more effective, versatile communicators by incorporating and expanding varied dialects and language patterns rather than throwing them to the wayside. So next, let's move on to Barbara Mellix from Outside In. This piece appeared in a literary journal called the Georgia Review back in 1987. Now, frame of reference, I graduated high school in 1987. So Barbara Mellix is a bit older than I am. She had already married and had children and had gone through her education before writing this piece for the 1987 Georgia Review. But here's a good quote from her that she starts off saying, "I grew up speaking what I considered two distinctly different languages, Black English and Standard English, or as I thought of them, and this is parenthetically, as I thought of them, the ordinary everyday speech of country coloreds and proper English," and that's found on page 338. Another little snippet of a quote that just kind of struck me as interesting and something that you can think about is on page 340, she says there is a, quote, relationship between language and power, end quote. So that's really something to think about, that there is this relationship between language and power. And again, just like I pointed out with Young's article, Mellix also points out and brings up an interesting point that will hint to that later unit that I referred to earlier. Paragraph 26, again, points to the adoption of a type of language or change in voice that we see in some students who are negotiating their way into the academic discourse community. So the take-home points for this article is that prior experiences with family, school, and local communities affect how an individual inhabits a particular language. The second point is language shapes how individuals think about and perceive their own experiences. And lastly, adjusting to writing in new situations, for example, the college classroom, happens intermittently and over time. So those are the take-home points from Barbara Mellix. And I think that is it. I will post those notes that I just referred to in the week 4 module so that you can refer to them and think about those quotes that I pulled out from the pieces. I do encourage you to do those readings. They really are very fascinating and will shed some insight, not only on those students who are African-American or non-white, people of color, but also to those of us who may not have grown up in, affluent white neighborhoods. So it's just something to think of there. All right. Hope you have a great week. If you have any questions about the rough draft, please don't hesitate to email me. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.